And that's really where the good content came from, was when we were not talking about like future content and we were actually talking about whatever was going on right then.
Right.
Yeah, that's where the good stuff was.
That's neato.
But I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I do think that it might be beneficial if we have some preparation about a topic, and then, because then you could get stuff that might support like your question or what's
Right.
happening in your life. It could be a book title or a quote, or I don't know that that's the direction we want to go, but adding additional like interesting content other than just our like queries.
Right. I do think that there's a lot of value in like being able to go really deep into something.
Mm-hmm.
So like we're prepared, we have thoughts, we have something that we read or we listened to, or I don't know, preparation materials of some sort, and we almost like a book club.
Yeah, kind of like a book club. We'll see. I do want to just let this unfold, so I'm enjoying just the process of it. I think that the important thing is that we find a voice that's uniquely ours. And Emily brings her personality, and you and I, we each bring our own personality, and we do it because we have something we want to say. So I think that's the most important thing. I think that'll translate. Do you have something to say? Do you want to be a part of a podcast like this, or do you want to be an occasional guest?
I mean, if we're hanging out all the time, great. I'm having fun. If there are if it's a different direction that's going to be best, and I'm an occasional guest, or Emily's an occasional guest, great.
Everything is an evolution, and I learn something new about myself every day. And anything where you go extreme is not such a good idea.
Yeah.
Everything has its pros and cons.
Everything in moderation.
Everything.
Some things can be out of balance, and that's healthy, but
yeah,
most things cannot. Or for a very, very limited amount of time.
Yeah. There's no true balance, really. I mean, I've just found in my life and with the people I've worked with that I think of balance more like this pendulum or an arc, and you're kind of moving in and out and in and out. And when you swing too far one way, then, you mindfully bring it back to the middle, some kind of equanimity, and then you swing the other way and you kind of come back. And you may be actually balanced for a moment, but you're always kind of moving back and forth within a certain. And as I get older, I just kind of mark those places on either side of that pendulum where I don't want to go beyond that, because then I know I'll get sick or I'll get hurt. Or I'll lose touch with my husband, or I'll lose touch with my friends, So keeping everything within a certain range keeps everybody happy, and the body happy, and the mind happy.
Yeah.
But to try and really achieve balance, it just is going to happen. At least not for much longer than a moment.
Right. Right. I don't think anybody really does, though. Even looking at people like Tony Robbins, who most people consider to be in great physical shape, to be in great mental shape, to not really get sick that often, to be well-spoken, have a wonderful family, and to kind of have his life in order. I mean, I highly doubt that he's in balance, just considering how many events he has and how often he's on a plane and how many companies he's invested in and everything else. It just feels like even those who can preach balance the best are probably a little out of balance somewhere.
Oh, well, the people that preach it the best are the ones that understand it the best. People say in my teaching and in my talking, wow, you've got it all figured out. And I'm like, I teach this stuff because I need this stuff to live. I would be so crazy, fast-paced if I didn't practice mindfulness.
Right.
If I didn't focus on something else, being present, I'd live in my head all the time. I'm a strategic planner. That's my largest strength.
Is it?
Yeah. So I did the Strengths Finder 2.0.
And what was your number one strength? Strategic planner was
Like,
the strength?
Out of the top 5,
Yeah.
4 of mine were strategic planning.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. One of my top 5, I can't remember what it is. I think it's called idelection or something like that.
Ideation?
Ideation means basically I live in my head all the time.
I have that top 5 strength too.
Oh, interesting. Yes, and I didn't even realize one of the character traits of that is that you think you've had conversations with people because you've imagined the whole conversation in your head. And I was saying to Carl one day, "Oh my gosh, Carl, do I do this?" And he's like, "Yes."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he would always say, "You never told me that." I'd be like, "Yes, I did. I remember the whole conversation."
Yeah.
And then I find out that I have the strength that basically says, no, you probably imagined it because you have a very strong imagination and you live a lot in your head.
I learned that I had that when I would think that we had a conversation and it turns out we didn't. And so I started saying, "Stop me if I've told you this before." Nobody ever stops me.
Mm-hmm.
It must be happening a lot.
Yeah, well, you live in your head.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I do.
Boy.
And that's where mindfulness really helps me, is because I notice when I'm in my head, like going over a story, or sometimes I relive conversations with people that I had 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And like I recreate the conversation in my head and I want it to go the way I want it to go. You know, who knows what those conversations really were because I've changed them so much in my head.
What are your other top 5 strengths?
Gosh, I don't remember. I know that idelection was one of them. Is one called input?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, input was one. Those are both strategic planning.
Input is, actually, I forget what it is. I have it too.
You have input and idelection or whatever?
Ideation.
Ideation.
Yeah.
I can look. This might be an interesting topic. I can look at. I am going to take a moment to go into my Google Drive.
Input. A person with a Strengths Finder theme of input is inquisitive and curious, always on the lookout for new and interesting information.
Mm-hmm.
All information that has been received or consumed is organized and filed away because the person with input believes they may need it someday.
Wow. I do. I definitely do that. Here, I'm looking for mine. I didn't see it. It didn't come up in my Google Drive. Yeah. I basically had no executor skills, which is, I think, interesting as a starter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a good starter of businesses. I think I might have had, maybe I had 1 executing out of the 5. And then 3 or 4 were strategic planning.
That's so very interesting.
I'm surprised as a coach and as a mindfulness teacher that I don't have any relationship building.
I'm not surprised by that at all.
Oh, really?
Mm-mm. And I'm not surprised at all that you have no execution ability.
Really? That's interesting. I was really surprised. I figured I'd be all executor.
No.
I am definitely not.
I don't think you execute most things. I think you have a team who executes most things.
Yes. I'm finding that out.
Yeah. And with relationship building, I think you make very strong relationships with people that you admire or want to be more like, or have some quality that you really want to surround yourself with.
Mm-hmm.
But that's very few people.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I don't generally call people. Like, one of my closest friends, we're going to see each other in 2 weeks. I mean, when I see her, I see her. We rarely touch base. I'm not really good at staying connected with people if they're not around. If they're not in my area.
And you're surprised that relationship building isn't in your top 5?
I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Relationships are very important to you, but that's not everything to you.
No. And I do just take for granted that people are going to be around and that they know that I care about them, and that just because I don't call them all the time doesn't mean anything. It just means I'm doing something else.
You build strong relationships. You're good at it. It's a strength of yours. But
it's just not one of my top 5.
Right.
So that's the thing. With the Strengths Finders 2.0, when we do the Strengths Finder stuff, you're only looking at your top 5. I mean, there's a whole host of other strengths that you have that aren't showing up in the top 5.
Right.
I'm hoping relationship building is pretty close, at least in the top 10.
I'm sure it's in the top 10.
But
you're not, like, you learn things and file them away far more often and far faster than you make a new friend.
Oh, yeah. I would say making friends is one of the most challenging things. I mean, I have a lot of people around me and I have a lot of acquaintances. But making a good friend, somebody that I would confide in, they're pretty few and far between. For one thing, most people I find don't understand confidentiality. And so I just don't tell people stuff because I don't want it repeated. So there's only a few people I know that I could trust with information, that just know if we're talking about it, it's confidential. So I have found that to be one of my biggest challenges. And I guess I learned that from experience because I've gotten into trouble that way, where people have repeated information that wasn't theirs to repeat. Yeah, so, and then being in the coaching world, I really learned the importance of confidentiality. So, I mean, I rarely even speak about anything anymore that isn't directly involving myself. And then, unless I'm okay with people repeating it, I don't say it. Because it's amazing, the stuff that people will repeat.
Quickly.
I mean, I found out I was swimming. I used to swim laps 3 times a week. And one day I'm swimming laps and a gentleman kind of taps me on the shoulder when I was doing one of my turns. And so I stopped and pulled out my earplugs and everything. And he said, "Hey, oh my gosh, I am so sorry." And I'm like, "For what?" He says, "I heard you're getting a divorce." I know. I said, "I am?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "No, not that I know of. Maybe I'm not aware. Maybe there's something I don't know about." He goes, "Well, I got the information from a really, really credible source." And I said, "Okay, who is the source?" He said, "Well, I don't want to tell you. I don't feel comfortable telling you." And I said, "Well, obviously it wasn't credible because it wasn't true. So who was it? I'd like to know who it was just so I can tell them, hey, it's not true." So he finally gave me the name, and so I called her up and I said, "I get that information goes around." I said, "But I heard that you were telling people that I was getting a divorce." I said, "I want you to know that I'm not getting a divorce." I said, "As far as I know, there aren't any problems with my marriage." And she goes, "Well, I got the information from a very credible source." And I said, "Who was the credible source?" And she goes, I don't feel like I can tell you." And I said, "Well, could you do me a favor? Could you tell her or him that it's not true?" I said, "I believe in the power of words, and I would rather that kind of stuff not be out in the universe." And she goes, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'd be happy to." And then I realized that I hadn't been wearing my wedding band. because I was doing so much training at the time. I was doing triathlons. And I was doing so much training on the bike and push-ups and all that kind of stuff. And then my ring bothered me. And so I took my ring off. And one day it had slipped off in the pool. So I took it off and I kind of, didn't put it back on. And I thought, I wonder if people are just making it up because they see I'm not wearing a wedding ring. I immediately put my wedding ring back on. So, anyway. People and language. Have you ever read the book, the Four Agreements?
No.
That would be a good book for us to talk about. The Four Agreements. One of those agreements is to be impeccable with your word. And it's just interesting when you read the chapter on being impeccable with your word, what that actually means. And our conversation about cussing and intention was very much in line with that be impeccable with your word, which was that your words can actually poison people and you don't even realize it. Like you put ideas into people's heads, or you say something negative and that negativity affects them in some way. And the author calls it poisoning. You actually poison people with your words and your thoughts. You don't realize it, but your thoughts have energy as well. And so even if you think it, you're potentially poisoning that person with your thoughts. And so the agreement is that you are impeccable with your words and your thoughts. And so you notice what's happening in your head.
Actually, since we talked about cussing, I have made a very intentional effort to not cuss.
Really?
Yes. Because you said that it changes the mood of the room no matter what.
It does.
And so even if I'm by myself, I have made a very intentional effort this week not to cuss and see what happens.
And what have you noticed?
Not much yet. Because I've noticed that every once in a while, depending on my mood, I'll be taken back by somebody cussing. And it doesn't affect me. Like, it doesn't bother me if I cuss. But I haven't been able to figure out yet what does that all mean? Or does it mean nothing, and the only thing that affects me is the shock value?
Mm-hmm. So the mindfulness practice is to just notice. When you cuss, notice your own felt sensations. Maybe even notice the thoughts in your head. And then tune your listening to the other people in the room. And notice what's their reaction. Can you gauge their body language? How did your language affect them? And it's kind of an experiment. You're just learning about people. You're learning about the human condition, and you're learning about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've noticed there's been a lot of conversation on Gary V's Instagram about his language. And I just find that fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
He's having to defend his language, his choice of words all the time.
I've thought a lot about how Gary V does it because I correlate it quite a bit with how Tony Robbins cusses.
You're right, he does.
But Tony is intentional with his cussing, and Gary seems not intentional with his cussing.
Yeah, Tony even said in his I'm Not Your Guru movie that he uses language to wake people up.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if Gary also does that. But I look at it a lot like I look at Tony's. Not because I think that they're similar, but because it just feels like sometimes it feels very natural, and sometimes when Tony cusses it feels very natural, and sometimes it feels very unnatural, and sometimes when Tony cusses it feels very unnatural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when Tony cusses, it's a jarring. It's like a jarring energy, like you could feel it like a smack on the face.
Yes.
Yeah. And I feel that from Gary too. I mean, it's very aggressive. It feels like a smack on the face. And so I wonder, is that the effect that you want to have with people? Like, I go back to the NLP being communication is the response you get. I mean, do you want people to feel continually smacked when you're talking to them? One of my own personal goals is to leave the world a better place. Leave this space a better place than I found it. Leave the sidewalk that I walk on a better place than I walk. That I found it. I was picking up trash on my way, walking from the butterfly house to the podcast room. I also want to leave people better than I found them in whatever way is possible. And if that means speaking kindly and smiling, then that's what it is. Using bad language where you're jarring people is just not my thing. And it's a different way of being.
Would you consider me to be a yeller?
Sometimes you yell, but it doesn't seem like you're not like Gary V. But yeah, you do have some of his mannerisms, come to think of it. I mean, you do have a big booming voice. Maybe it's just that, maybe it's just the way it's cut and put together and the angle that they film it at and all that stuff. Maybe he's not actually yelling. But I do sometimes feel like when I watch his stuff that I've just been yelled at.
Interesting. Well, this is something that I do want to go into because I view his communication style to be entirely different. And so I want to know why you think that you feel yelled at after you see him on your feed.
Mm-hmm. He's very confident. He's definitely one of those people that says, I don't care. I don't give a fuck what you think. I'm going to do whatever I want. That way of being has an aggressiveness about it. It's not a soft way of going through the world. It's very, fuck you kind of. The words are really close, but I can't quite get them. It's not in retaliation, but it's like, it does feel like it's a fight or a war or he's raging, he's got a battle that he's raging. And even though he doesn't really care what people think based on his language, he seems like he's always defending himself. There's a saying that I use a lot in my teaching, and that's what you resist persists. So I just find it fascinating that he's this celebrity personality who doesn't really care what people think, yet he's always defending how he behaves in the world. Because what you resist persists. So he's pushing against something, in my opinion, right? He's pushing against something that's creating this consistent resistance. That same conversation coming up again and again and again. It's just my perspective.
Interesting.
But I have been watching his stuff lately just because I find it fascinating.
In what way?
Well, the comments are really fascinating too. So I read through some of the comments and you get people all across the board. It's very heated dialogue oftentimes. It's like, what is everybody so worked up about? Just sometimes wonder, creating all this kind of, crazy energy. What is that all about? What's it for? What's it meant to produce?
What I gather is he is trying to guide young people and provide a more mature, relatable voice to teach the things that are really important, like empathy or like just personal responsibility and accountability. So I hear those words quite a bit, and I don't hear those words coming out of schools, which is an entirely different conversation, or coming out of many households with parental figures, or coming out of like the mainstream media or through
Mm-hmm.
most television shows or through most Netflix shows. But I think he has the unique ability to present to certain individuals who really put entrepreneurship on a pedestal or who want to make something of themselves that's outside of the norm. He provides a vision of what life could be like,
Mm-hmm.
and then talks about some very fundamental principles of independent success. Independent meaning you're not dependent on others for accountability
Mm-hmm.
and for that empathy and for everything else. So my thought is he's doing that, and that provides him quite a bit of personal fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
I also think he uses his personal social media page as a way to test things that he's going to run for their client, for VaynerMedia's clients. And so I think that
I guess I don't really know what he does for, what's his company?
VaynerMedia,
Okay.
they do, they handle the marketing and advertising budgets for Fortune 500 companies. So Fortune 500s will come to them and say, we need you to help us connect with this age demographic, or we need you to help us get to this level of engagement. And his whole company's niche is they understand social media better than everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably true.
Mm-hmm.
And so Vayner's just a consulting firm.
Okay, I see. Interesting.
But I do think that there are definitely benefits to his business for him being the person that he is, and having 3 million followers or 5 million followers, and being able to run large tests on his social media page. But I think he also enjoys inspiring and providing a roadmap for younger people, or at least I think that's his intention. Mm-hmm. That's what I've gathered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now that you say that, I do recall that he has said some things about responsibility and about accountability and about doing the work. It seems like I've heard him say that many times. You got to do the work.
Yeah, and I think a lot of mentor-like figures don't tell people that. A lot of parents aren't telling their kids that. And so he has found this spot that is, he grew up knowing that he has to just do the work and grind it out. Mm-hmm. And he's like looking to pass that on. I don't know. I really don't know what his core intention is with it. I think it's interesting that you feel slapped in the face.
Not always. Like I commented on one of his Instagram posts that I admired the fact that he was dedicating so much time to educating young people about entrepreneurship and about what it takes to be successful. And I do believe that. I mean, I think that takes dedication, and it can't be easy to be in the limelight all the time like he is. I mean, he's probably always got a camera in his face, which would be a real bummer. Right. Anywhere you go, and he's always being stopped and being asked questions. And a lot of the Instagram posts that I see are literally he's walking and somebody shoves a camera in his face and asks him a question, and then he's, So it can't be an easy way to go through life. And so I admire that he's willing to put himself out there for young people. And I have to say there's just a little bit of judgment there. And again, what we were talking about before, just the choice of words, language, and what are you teaching young people about? I would never hire somebody in my organization that talked like that in a meeting or with my clients or whatever. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the energy that follows those words. That aggressive behavior, I just would never. Now, granted, I'm teaching mindfulness. So I'm in an industry where, the goal is to help people to be more present, be more aware, and to accept the world as it is around you. So I recognize that my judgments of Gary and his language are, just judgments. They're just my own judgments.
What I think is interesting about Gary, and you're saying you feel slapped in the face.
Uh-huh.
His communication style, I feel, is very much like mine personally. But I never feel like I'm yelling. The feedback I get is that I'm assertive.
Yeah.
And that I often do things very quickly, but that leads people to feel like I don't value my time with them, because I'll walk into a meeting or I'll walk into something, make a quick decision. I want it to take as little time as possible, and then I will leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely have a strong personality with a deep voice.
Mm-hmm.
But I almost always feel like I talk second. Which is why I feel like it's very interesting that you feel like you get yelled at.
So I see similarities in your conversation styles and I see differences. But the truth of that is unclear. Like, I talk to you all the time. So I know your communication style. Gary Vee, the only thing I know about him is what's posted on Instagram.
Right.
So his communication style is completely lost to me. They're cutting and editing and pasting, and you can tell even in one clip that it's been cut a couple times and other things have been inserted in. So, that one paragraph that he says has been cut 3 times. And all of the really aggressive parts have been kind of combined together.
Mm-hmm.
And he's responding to a question, generally.
Yeah.
So it's really, really hard to tell what he's like in real life. I mean, there's no way to know. I mean, even if you sit across the boardroom table from him, you're not going to really know what he's like.
Right. Just
like I don't really know what you're like, and you don't really know what I'm like. We live in our heads. We hardly know ourselves, let alone somebody else.
Right. We learn something new about ourselves every day.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we make assumptions about people. We think we know people. We know how they have behaved in the past. And from that, we have expectations about how they're going to behave in the future. But that's not who they are. There's a great meditation that's all about that. Who are you? A Buddhist meditation. It's a series of questions that you ask yourself, am I my thoughts? Am I my beliefs? Am I my finger? If I'm my body, what happens if I lose my finger? What happens if you lose? So you ask yourself all these questions about who am I? What am I? It's a fascinating exercise to go through.
We'll add that to the pod.
What's that?
We'll add that to the podcast.
Oh yeah, that who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can be hard for some people because it does, cause you to question reality. Like if you're not any of these things, then really, what are you? Oh, I don't have the answer. But I would say you're definitely not your language. You're not the language you speak.
Right.
But we're often judged by the language we speak. I mean, just this conversation about Gary Vee, I've totally judged him based on how he talks.
Mm-hmm.
You're not what you look like. You're not what clothes you wear. You're not even your physique or what you eat. They say you are what you eat, right? You're not what you eat. No. You're not what you read. You're not what you watch on TV. It's just interesting.
Yeah. I do think that looking at things that we should talk about, changing your mind, not in terms of when should you change your mind, but how we view other people who change their minds. Something I've been really thinking about a lot lately, and I think about it quite a bit with Gary, actually, which is what brought it up. But one of the differences I see with how you will answer a question and how Gary will answer a question is in the question.
Mm-hmm.
The questions that you're asked, I feel, are oftentimes deeply personal and entirely subjective to just that person.
Mm-hmm.
Like as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking about a lot of Gary's content, the questions that he's asked are very general. And he speaks in definitives. And I'm like kind of going back now to the times where people have said that they feel that I have slapped them in the face
Mm-hmm.
because I too speak in definitives.
So tell me a
until
little bit
something
more,
changes
like
my mind.
speaking in definitives. What exactly do you mean by that?
So I feel like Gary is this way. I feel that I am this way. And I think Tony is not this way.
Mm-hmm.
So I speak in a belief that I have. I will be 100% into that belief or that theory or that idea until something better arises.
Okay.
And I will forget that that belief even existed. And I will completely change direction. As long as it's better.
Mm-hmm.
But I will be 100% about a belief, and then if somebody presents contradictory evidence, or somebody forces me to think differently, or somebody asks the right series of questions in order to make me think, oh, wait, I might be wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
I'll really think about it, wonder if it's correct, and if I deem that I was not correct, take on whatever that new belief or that new theory is and go full steam ahead with that one.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the feedback that I get, and I wonder if it's sort of how you feel too, because I speak in that definitive,
Mm-hmm.
it's either yes or it's no, or it's 100 or it's 0.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm willing to change my mind.
Okay.
Leaves people to think that I've slapped them in the face, even if I think I'm at 100 with something. They're forcing me to think a different way, and I'll ask 5 questions to see if they're right.
Mm-hmm.
But when I do change my mind, then people wonder what I believe in. Or what are the things that I'm not willing to change my mind on? Is there anything that I'm not willing to change my mind on? Do I have core principles?
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that? And so I really think that there's something interesting to how to handle when someone else changes their mind, because I also know when I think that I've understood somebody to a fairly fundamental level, and then they change their mind on something that I thought was fundamental, the next question I ask is, do I really know this person?
Right. Well, that goes back to our initial comment about you never really know somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, we don't know ourselves. We really don't.
Yeah.
And I remember getting into a conversation. I'm not going to say with who because, they may eventually listen to this podcast. I don't know. And this person basically accused me of being a relativist. I'd never heard the term before, relativist. I mean, I'd heard the term relative.
Can you define it, please? 'Cause I don't know what it is.
I don't even really know. I don't know. I mean, I had somebody tell me once that relativism is a really bad thing. Not the same person, but I made this comment about the fact that somebody accused me of being a relativist, and this other person said that's not a good thing. It's what's politically happening in the world today. I think we'll have to look it up, but basically they meant it as a negative thing, that I don't believe in anything, that everything is relative, in my opinion.
So in your opinion, everything is relative?
Yes.
Okay.
Based on your perspective. So, you have a different idea of what truth is than I do. And Carl has a different idea of what truth is. And even in any situation and any conversation and anything that happens, we each perceive that differently based on our own past, our habits, our beliefs, the what I call filters. The idea was that everybody's perspective is different, that it's all relative based on the person. Like truth is relative. And he accused me of being a relativist.
What's the opposite? An absolutist?
I would think. Yeah, somebody who believes that this is the truth and it's absolutely the truth. But what would you consider an absolute? I mean, I'm not a scientist, and I'm really not a theologian.
Right. As somebody just as a common civilian.
Mm-hmm. Just as a normal person who's relatively intelligent. I mean, would you say God is absolute? I mean, no, because everybody's has their own perspective of God, so there's no absolute.
Right. Even if you just take 2 different religions.
Yeah.
They both have their own God.
Yeah.
It's not the same person.
Even this table, according to scientists, doesn't exist. It's just a bunch of atoms that we perceive as matter.
Right.
So what's absolute about this? I suppose maybe the atom absolute? But even when they did studies on the atom was mostly nothing, no space. There was mostly nothing there, right?
Right. Right. It's like Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah. So, what's absolute? I don't know what absolute is.
I don't know. It seems like being called a relativist, as long as they're not calling you an annoying relativist, because there's a difference between being a relativist and being an annoying one.
Mm-hmm.
I think relativism is annoying when it's used as a veil for permitting mediocrity.
Yes, and that is what this other gentleman was telling me, is it keeps people from achieving anything. It's like they're, yeah.
But I don't think I have any like global universally true absolutes.
I can't
and I'm
think
doing
of,
my best.
I can't think of any.
Trying to be above average.
Mm-hmm. Certainly not in my world, my mindfulness world.
We're getting all sorts of
interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But what started was that yes or no, the definitives, being definitive about something. And I know that the fact that I've been called a relativist, as I think back on it now, I know that's one of the reasons. I'm not interested in engaging in debates with people because, your opinion is yours and mine is mine. And really, what's the point of that? What I say is rarely going to change your mind, especially if you feel adamant about your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
All it's going to do is create, an environment potential for anxiety or frustration.
I've been thinking a similar thing lately with debates on almost anything.
It's great if you have dialogue with somebody who's open-minded.
Yes.
And they're willing to kind of play that tennis game of back and forth. This is what I believe. This is what I believe. This is what I believe. This is what I. And then you learn something.
Yeah.
But if you're faced with somebody who is like, I'm right and you're wrong, it's just, what's the point of that?
So would you feel that Gary's definitivism, or my definitivism comes off as closed-minded?
So I know you. So I know you're not closed-minded. I know that all I have to do is ask you a question about it, a clarifying question, and I'll get more information as to why you believe what you believe. And I respect that everybody has their own, belief system, the way that they conduct their life. I don't know about Gary. I doubt that I'm ever gonna be able to. Just through Instagram and stuff like that, there's no way I'm gonna know whether or not he's closed-minded. I wouldn't say he's closed-minded. I've never gotten that sense from him.
Do you think that's interesting?
I think he's opinionated. Opinionated doesn't necessarily mean closed-minded, though. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think opinionated and closed-minded are the same thing. I do think he has an opinion on quite a few things.
Yes.
I also see him say, I don't know a lot, though.
Yeah, I think oftentimes if I'm faced with somebody who's opinionated and I ask a couple clarifying questions, it changes the whole nature of the rhythm of the conversation, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I think the times that an opinionated person appears closed-minded is when I'm also opinionated. And so you've got two people that are maybe they're just not communicating. Because one person is stating their truth, the other person is stating their truth, and neither are listening. One person has to be authentically listening. And when you're authentically listening, you're really wanting to know the other person. You're wanting to know their perspective. You're really wanting to understand them. Get a true sense of them.
In the case that is two absolutists disagree, and one person cusses, what happens?
Two absolutes.
Maybe we should bring two people in here. But
so you're talking about three people,
so
or two people.
Two people are talking.
Right.
They disagree and they're closed-minded.
Okay.
Could cussing open their mind?
According to Tony Robbins, it can.
Yeah.
If it's placed at the right place in the conversation.
Right. Just curious.
Yeah. If not if it's a regular form of conversation. So if one person it just cusses and the other person is not cussing, but they're both opinionated, and then it becomes this closed-minded conversation, it's not going to open things up. It works for Tony Robbins.
Yeah, it does.
He's also a big dude.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 5'2". He's what, 6'7" or 8 or 9 or.
Yeah, he's built like a brick house.
He's a big guy, and I mean that commands attention.
Yeah.
If I stand in front of somebody and yell expletives, they're just going to look at me and go, "Shoo fly, shoo shoo." But you got a big guy like that standing in front of you, right on top of you, with their head so close.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, you're going to wake up.
Yeah.
It's also about basic compassionate or even active listening, compassionate communication. Which most of us speak or listen to speak. We don't really listen to actually understand what the other person's saying. So active listening, especially in today's day and age with technology and texting and Instagram and Snapchat, and do people even talk anymore? Like really talk? Do young people talk? Do you talk?
I don't know if I'm an outlier, because almost all of my phone notifications are off.
Mm-hmm.
What I perceive, and I don't know if my friends are outliers, because almost all of their phone notifications are off. But what I perceive is a trend where young people, when they are together, are not necessarily on their phone quite as often, or they're not scrolling through Instagram and having a conversation. But I do see that with older people.
I have everything turned off on my phone, all my notifications. I get texts and I get the mindfulness moments from the mindfulness app. That's it. I don't get any other notifications on my phone. And I have an Apple Watch that I've been wearing. I bought it a while ago, and I quit wearing it because it was distracting me too much.
I turned off all my notifications on my watch, too.
I might have to do that. So far today, it hasn't been bad, although I was doing a meditation today and forgot to take I was leading a meditation today and forgot to take off my watch, and I got 2 texts while I was leading the meditation. So, the students in the room don't know it because their eyes are closed and they're meditating. I'm leading it. But I know it. It removes me from the present moment with the students. And so it's very distracting. So yes, I need to turn off those notifications on my Apple Watch.
I think boomers are much worse with technology than the young people are. Admittedly, I'm a young person.
I would
but
agree.
I never show my friends anything on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I do, I know exactly where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes less than 5 seconds to find it. and that happens almost never. It might be in the way that in a difference in the way that we use the technology.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I see something on Instagram, I will just send it to my friends right there on the spot and then probably forget about it for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. How do you send it?
You press the little envelope feature and you direct message it to your friends.
I wondered what that was.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Or I'll screenshot it and I'll send it to a group chat.
If you screenshot, it doesn't get the action though, right? It's just a still photo.
Yes.
Yeah,
So if it's a photo, I might screenshot it.
Okay.
I do that with memes.
Yeah, if it's a photo, I'll screenshot. Sometimes I do that for things that I want to remember for later. But I didn't know you could. Can you share it on your own Instagram? No.
You
Okay.
cannot repost or retweet.
Okay.
But yeah, I think boomers are way worse with their devices. And I think the way that they are worse with their devices does change the energy of the room as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it causes what I've also seen, I saw this at Christmas, it also causes a little bit of tension when a boomer is showing somebody something on their phone and they're showing a kid something on their phone. Like a 12-year-old.
Uh-huh.
Kid doesn't care, first of all. Second of all, the kid uses their phone differently. And third, they don't want to wait for you to figure out how to open your Photos app.
Yeah, I could just picture the scenario.
Right. But that happens with boomers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're at a bar and it's like, hey, you're at a bar, you're talking with two other people. Like, imagine I'm a Generation Xer.
Mm-hmm.
You're at a bar, you're talking with two other people. You have this large group conversation and somebody comes in and says, look at my phone.
Mm-hmm. So-and-so just posted this on Facebook.
Or texting it to them.
Yeah.
We'll get
I
to
just
it.
got this text. Yeah, the generations, it's fascinating. And, your generation and then Generation Z, you grew up with the technology.
Yeah.
I'm Generation X, so I don't even think I started. When I was in high school, I was taking typing classes on a typewriter. It was an electric typewriter, but it was still a typewriter. So my relationship to technology is very different, and my understanding of how it all works too is very different. And I watch my parents and my in-laws with their technology, and it's funny. It's wonderful how it has brought the world to their fingertips. And I know I appreciate that for myself. It's just having that information so easily accessible. And I think it's only going to get better for seniors. I'm really grateful for being the age that I am, because I know that there's going to be autonomous cars. By the time I would get to the age where somebody would be taking my car keys away, there's going to be autonomous cars. I am so grateful, because once you lose your ability to transport yourself places, you lose all of your freedom. So I know that probably will not be my future. And also, they've got stem cell therapy and all kinds of other interesting medical advancements that hopefully will help for me to have sound hips and knees and shoulders.
Sound brain.
And brain. So I'm really excited that I was born in the age that I was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's going to be a lot of great advancements.
Yeah. Maybe something that we should talk about is the generation gap. Because this is, I think, what we're living through right now is the single toughest gap between three generations.
Why do you think that?
Because we'll say 4 generations. Boomers' brains are wired entirely differently. And Gen Z, which there's now a new generation underneath Gen Z, but Gen Z, as those who are not toddlers, are they don't know life without smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
And life without instant access.
Mm-hmm.
But the rift that's caused because of smartphones or because of video games and new types of economies that are coming in. I just was talking to somebody who's a parent last week, and he was like, listen, my son just can't stop playing video games and I don't know how to get them motivated. But for an Xer or for a boomer, video games were always and only a leisure activity.
Mm-hmm.
But for Generation Zer, video games are a viable revenue stream.
Mm-hmm.
That's an entrepreneurial opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But those types of interactions where Gen Zers are frustrated with boomers because they just don't understand like what is going on, and boomers are frustrated with Zers because they understand what life was like before all of this happened, and there's a communication gap because now Gen Zers have their own language and boomers do, and boomers think that Gen Zers don't speak proper English anymore, and there's like you don't even know how to write in cursive is a thing that I hear quite a bit. But mindfulness in those, like on Christmas, or mindfulness when you're talking to your grandparents, or when you're talking to your grandparents' opinionated friend, is something that like I hear quite a bit about as a 24-year-old. I know it's happening to the 10 to 15-year-olds of our current generation, and they're like, I don't even know how to deal with you people. You're like a foreign species to me.
I think it's fascinating because, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, the older generation said the same thing. You know, when I was a kid, I walked 5 miles in bare feet in the snow. You have no idea what it was like. Every generation feels like the next generation is like a new species. The one thing I find fascinating about the way things are now is that the way technology is moving and it's so quickly changing that the older generation, they really are in some ways vulnerable. I mean, the way the world is changing so quickly that their brains just can't keep up with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's got to be scary. So I think there's a little bit of fear there. They don't really understand what's going on. And I know I can say for myself, I was watching something by Diamandis yesterday or the day before yesterday that had to do with altering the genetics in fetuses in China. And my first instinct was, oh my God, they're creating monsters. Like, that was my first instinct before, it was checked at my brain. Of course, I realize that that's not the case, right? But I know more about modern technology and where that technology is heading. And, but the generation before me, they don't know any of that stuff. They don't understand it. For them, I mean, they were a part of the cloning argument with the sheep. They're genuinely afraid about what's happening with the world through technology. They think that, in many ways, the technology is evil. It's all bad.
It's funny considering how often they pull out their phones to show their friends a photo on Facebook.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily the technology that they're referring to, but certainly some of the stuff that's in science is bad. And I overheard a conversation yesterday about Bitcoin. Were you privy to that conversation? Mm-mm. Okay. And talking about Bitcoin. They don't understand it. They don't understand it at all. Not even on a cursory, surface way. When I try to explain Bitcoin to some people in the older generation, I mean, I have a basic understanding of what it is and how it works. I'm not an expert. If I try to explain it to somebody else, they absolutely don't get it at all. Somebody of an older generation, they don't get it at all. If it's not backed by gold, then it has no value.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reality is our money's not backed by gold.
Right.
So I'm not quite sure the value of that argument, but it's all based on fear. They just don't understand it. And because of that, they believe that the younger generation well, let's put it this way. Because of that, they have created a bigger gap between themselves and the younger generation because of that fear. That's just my perspective. But I do think
I think
that,
anytime you operate out of fear, you create a gap between you and the individual or the group with which you're associated or you're associating.
mm-hmm.
Going back to, you remember the old people of your generation when you were a child saying similar things about you. That's the second hardest gap, I think, in history. You had it when you were a child, because individuals, when you were below the age of 15,
Mm-hmm.
individuals above the age of 60 remember growing up without electricity.
Mm-hmm. Running water,
Right.
toilets.
Like everything before that was the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like maybe you got a car and you got to move faster, but that's not anything like staying up until midnight and being able to read with a light on.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree that the Bitcoin argument's an interesting one, because you read the news says that Bitcoin's being used to buy drugs and to pay off like for ransomware
Mm-hmm.
when your computer gets infected. And so now it's like, well, my computer got a virus. A, technology is bad. B, now I have to use this new thing called Bitcoin that's untraceable. Technology must be really bad.
That was also part of their conversation. Yes, the conversation that I overheard. I was just kind of chuckling to myself.
And so operating out of fear and operating out of fear where your first response is no,
Mm-hmm.
almost makes you closed-minded.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And if you have a reason why you're closed-minded, now you're closed-minded and opinionated.
Mm-hmm. So I do think that affects their relationships with the younger generation.
Yeah.
They don't understand it. And everything that they believed about success is just not true.
Right.
Anymore. You know, I still hear people in my generation, or maybe a little bit older. So I'm Generation X, and I'm 52. So maybe a little bit older than I am, encouraging people to go to college, get a bachelor's degree, get a master's degree, get a doctorate. And, you know, for some career choices, that's appropriate. But these days, really, if you go into some of the trades, you have much more job security than you're going to have anywhere else. You're going to have higher salaries. And we need people in those jobs in order to keep our country running. Yeah.
Yeah. Starting a plumbing company right now is pretty profitable.
Yeah. Yeah, I
As long
went
as
to
you
a
can
job
find
site
plumbers.
last week where they hire high school kids in the vocational school, electricians, high school kids. It's a nonprofit to do their electrical work. And there were about 20 young kids in there running electrical lines. And I looked around and not a single woman. That's some of the best work that a woman could have.
Mm-hmm.
It's, high paid job, great job security. So
Awesome hours.
and it was still all guys.
Yep.
Yeah, awesome hours. So
Yeah.
what's happening that the schools aren't, directing people into these trades?
And what's happening where parents aren't creating worlds of possibility in all aspects for their children?
Yeah,
Like, why is it that only men can be electricians?
it's crazy.
That's ridiculous. If I were a woman, if I were like a young mom, and I had to have electrical work done at my house, I'd pay more for a woman. I'd also pay more for a plumber.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want strange men just walking into my house.
Mm-hmm. Of course, maybe that's why they're men, because women then have to go into houses. I don't know. I mean, the worst thing about being an electrician is you have to crawl around on the floor sometimes. But, I mean, really, I don't know. I think it'd be a great job.
Yeah. I crawl on the floor whenever I drop something.
I'm not sure I'd want to be a plumber, because anything that has to do with body fluids.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think I could do that. Even grease in the sink makes me sick.
Yeah.
So that would be a hard one. But electrical work, I think I could. I would enjoy that.
Also, I don't know if the thought that maybe it's male dominated because you have to walk into people's homes holds water, because quite a few cleaning services are run by females.
That's right. They're going into people's homes all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I don't understand that. I think there's something going on there, that they're still directing all men into the electrical trades. And come to think of it, I have never met a woman electrician. Are there any women electricians out there? If
She's
there
probably
are,
better at her job than the men are.
yeah, talk to me. We'll put you on the air. Yeah, so I think that things have changed so much. That older generation is still pushing kids to go to college, and many kids that are graduating from college, they're not getting hired. And a lot of different, for instance, a lot of manufacturing jobs, they're going to end up becoming more mechanic. There's going to be robots. I was not coming up with the right words.
Out of necessity. Nobody's going there.
Out of necessity, because nobody's doing it, and because I think it decreased costs a little bit.
I think it's interesting about women and how we're guiding women as well, is the national average, or the national ratio for women to females to males in college is 3-1 female to male.
Really?
Yeah. But walk into any engineering class, you might have one female there. Arts and humanities, flip the ratio.
And it's all women.
And so what are we doing what are we and what are the previous generations doing to guide women into that, to thinking that that's where they should be? Because also the arts and the humanities pay less than everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
There's less job security. You have to go get a master's or a PhD if you want to have a good job, because that's what everybody else did.
Mm-hmm.
And you work worse hours.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think it's interesting. We think we've made such great strides, and we really have. We have made, when I say we, women, career women, we have made a lot of strides. I mean, the world is a completely different place than it was when I started working in the world, as far as what the opportunities are, and also how I'm treated. But still, we have a long way to go. And oftentimes I think that the glass ceiling exists in the minds of the women. It really does. I don't know, there's just certain beliefs that are still inherent in the way women operate in the world, that not all women, obviously, because there's more and more women every day that are breaking through that ceiling, but there are just a lot of women out there that the reason that they're where they are is because, well, they don't have some of the characteristics, not abilities, right? We're not talking about ability. We're talking about characteristics of the men, like that number one characteristic of asking for what you want, I think, is one that misses a lot. Oftentimes men just go in and they say, I want that promotion and I deserve it. Or they walk in and they say, I want a pay raise or I'm leaving. The women won't do that.
Mm-mm.
So simply asking for what you want, having the confidence to go out there and get it.
To being that assertive.
Being assertive. I am not assertive. That's probably one of the reasons why I work for myself. The community decides whether I'm doing a good job or not. They either come to my classes or attend my workshops or buy the products that I'm selling, or they don't. And that's how I know I'm doing a good job or not doing a good job, is by whether or not people are on board.
The market tells you. It's true.
I'm going off on a tangent. So on that note, I'm thinking that we should just sound off. Sound off. All right. Thank you all for listening. Have a great evening.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you'd like to connect with us on social media, you can find Annamarie at Mindfully Annamarie. You can find myself at Emily VDW, and you can find Evan at _Evan Ryan. We'll talk to you next week.